The Psychology of Money. Morgan Housel, Part 2. Hey everyone, welcome back. If you caught Part 1 of our deep dive into the psychology of money, you already know that Morgan Housel's insights are a game changer for how we think about wealth, risk, and decision-making. But if you haven't seen the first part yet, trust me, you'll want to start there. I've linked it right up in the top corner. Now in Part 2, we're going even deeper into the hidden forces that shape our financial decisions. The emotional, psychological, and historical currents that pull us in directions we don't even realize. Let's be real. Money isn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. If it were, we'd all be rich by following simple formulas. But instead, we make decisions based on fear, excitement, regret, ego, and even weird historical patterns we don't fully understand. That's exactly what this section of the book unpacks. In this video, we'll break down why sometimes it's better to be reasonable than strictly rational with our money, how surprise events reshape our best-laid financial plans, and why the dreaded concept of room for error might be your hidden superpower rather than a timid cop-out. We're also going to look at real-world stories, from fever treatments, no, seriously, to the fall of corporate giants, so we can understand how perfectly logical strategies can blow up in our faces if we don't factor in our all-too-human side. So if you're someone who's ever stared at the stock market, shaking your head in disbelief, or if you've woken up at 3 a.m. with panic about your retirement, or if you've sworn to never make that mistake again, only to do it again anyway, this video is for you. Stick around, and by the end, you'll walk away with fresh insights, practical strategies, and a new lens for seeing money not just as math, but as behavior, biology, and psychology. The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel is widely considered one of the best financial books of the decade, and for good reason. Unlike traditional finance books that focus on formulas and investment strategies, Housel dives into the emotional and psychological aspects of money, making it accessible, insightful, and timeless. So without further ado, let's dive in. Chapter 11, Reasonable is Better Than Rational. Morgan Housel points out that we're not spreadsheets, we're emotional creatures, and that's okay. Instead of chasing some perfect mathematical formula for financial decisions, we might want to adopt a more reasonable stance that acknowledges our quirks and emotions. For instance, the difference between rational and reasonable is the difference between, hey, get a fever, it fights the infection, and nope, I hate feeling lousy, so I'll pop a pill right now. In this chapter, Housel uses a wild historical anecdote. A doctor who tried to treat syphilis by inducing fevers with malaria. Believe it or not, it did help a good number of patients. Yet in our modern world, most of us see a fever as something to eliminate, not something beneficial to embrace. That same tension applies to our investing or saving habits. The short-term pain, like market volatility, or refusing immediate gratification, can lead to better long-term health. But it hurts, and humans being humans often prioritize comfort right now over a higher payoff later. Picture this, it's 2025, you've got your smartphone open, doom scrolling through social media, and you see the stock market is down 10% in a day. Every rational piece of data might say, ride it out. Historically, dips happen, it'll likely recover. But emotionally, you're thinking, I want to stop hurting today, I'm selling like now. That's the difference between rational on paper and reasonable in real life. Housel highlights how even Nobel Prize-winning economist Harry Markowitz, who basically invented some of the foundations of modern portfolio theory, chose a very simple personal investment approach, half in stocks, half in bonds. Why? Because he visualized how awful he'd feel if stocks soared without him or crashed with all his money tied up in them. That might not be the mathematically optimal plan, but it's a plan that's easier to stick with psychologically. Let's dive into why being reasonable works better. This chapter underscores that what looks irrational on paper may be the exactly right thing for the real, breathing, spouse-having, anxiety-prone human. The big message is, the best strategy is the one you can stick to over the long term, not necessarily the one with the highest returns on a spreadsheet. There's a difference between a fever that might be beneficial and actually wanting to endure that fever. Next, we dive into the power of surprise and how bigger historical forces, and those surprising events we never saw coming, might blow our rational calculations out of the water. Chapter 12, Surprise. History is mostly the study of surprises, Morgan Housel explains, or as Stanford professor Scott Sagan famously said, things that have never happened before happen all the time. Humans are notoriously bad at predicting these events, yet they shape our financial lives more than anything else. Think about catastrophes such as the Great Depression or World War II. Both reconfigured entire economies in ways no one had precisely predicted. The lesson. Just because we can see the logic after the fact doesn't mean we could have seen it before it happened. In investing terms, we glance at a stock chart in hindsight and say, I should have sold right there. But we never truly know that right there was about to happen. Did you plan for a global health crisis that would shut down entire economies and shift billions of people into remote work in 2020? Probably not. But guess what? If you had some margin of safety built in, or if you were at least psychologically ready for unknown unknowns, you fared better. That's not about doomsday prepping. It's about acknowledging that surprise events happen more often than we care to admit. Housel reminds us that too many investors treat history like a formula. Oh, the market crashed exactly 49.3% in 2008, so that's our worst-case scenario. But guess what? The future might make that crash look mild, or it might never replicate that specific dynamic again. The bigger principle is to accept uncertainty and plan accordingly. The danger is in believing that the worst thing from the past is the worst thing possible in the future. Because, historically, we've seen some brand new disasters we never anticipated. One of the illusions Housel warns about is overconfidence from people who have been around the block. If you lived through, say, the 1970s inflation, you might think you know exactly how inflation will unfold next time. The reality is, even if a new wave of inflation or recession hits, it might play out under radically different conditions. Don't assume that just because you've seen a few storms, you know this storm. The best approach is humility in the face of future surprises. Next, we'll unravel how building in room for error in your financial decisions can protect you from the surprises we just discussed. Stay tuned. It's going to be eye-opening and might save you from meltdown-level stress. Chapter 13, Room for Error. This chapter is all about acknowledging that uncertainty, randomness, and chance are fundamental parts of life, particularly financial life. As Housel emphasizes, the best investors build in a margin of safety. That means having more cash than the spreadsheet says you need, or investing less aggressively than the math might dictate, just so you can sleep at night and survive the inevitable surprises. Housel loves telling the story of blackjack card counters in Las Vegas. These individuals have a statistical edge, maybe 2% over the house. That's enough to build fortunes, provided you don't go all in and lose your bankroll the moment the odds go against you for a few hands. So what do the pros do? They bet small enough that they can survive unlucky streaks. This is the essence of room for error. Even when the odds are in your favor, you never want to get completely wiped out. Imagine you have a 90% chance of winning $1 million if you bet everything you have. That seems like a sweet deal, right? But if the 10% downside is complete ruin, are you really comfortable with that? Many people might say yes, until they're actually in that moment, palms sweating, about to risk their life savings. Suddenly that 10% chance of disaster looms huge. Reasonable says, I'd rather build wealth steadily with fewer sleepless nights than risk total destruction for potential bragging rights. Real-life room for error can be 1. Emergency funds. Keep some cash on hand that you never invest so you can handle car repairs, medical bills, or job loss. 2. Conservative debt levels. Resist the temptation to max out leverage even if interest rates are super low. Because if the housing market tumbles or your job disappears, high leverage can bury you in no time. 3. Saving more than the calculator suggests. If your retirement math says save X%, maybe save X plus 5% to prepare for market surprises or career changes. Housel mentions real stories, like startup offices flooding or big corporations undone by events so bizarre no one thought to plan for them. The moral, if the entire success of your plan hinges on a single point not failing, that single point will eventually fail. Sometimes it's the mice in the German tanks at Stalingrad. So don't design your financial life so precariously that one mishap wrecks it all. Morgan Housel references Bill Gates' approach. Keep enough in the bank to pay a year's worth of payroll even if you have zero revenue. That's room for error. Similarly, Warren Buffett famously insists on more than enough cash to weather storms so he never has to cringe when the market dips 20%. He might not always be optimized for the greatest return, but he's optimized for survival and longevity, which ultimately can lead to greater returns because he's around to see them. Room for error helps with external surprises, but what about internal changes, like the reality that you personally might want something completely different in 10 years? Next chapter, we tackle why the future you is almost a stranger to the present you. Chapter 14, You'll Change. We often misjudge our future selves. Morgan Housel points to the concept called the end of history illusion. People notice how different they were 5, 10 years ago, but assume who they are right now is who they'll be forever. Spoiler alert, you will keep changing. Housel gives an example of a friend who pushed through monumental obstacles to become a doctor, then realized how grueling and stressful it was. It's easy to imagine how fulfilling it'll feel once you arrive, but the day-to-day reality can be a painful wake-up call. On top of that, as we age, our wants shift. You might think you want to hustle 80 hours a week in your 20s, only to desperately crave more family time in your 30s. Consider that 18-year-old who picks a college major in theoretical physics, invests thousands in an education, and by 25 decides what truly lights them up is graphic design. But they think, I can't let that expensive degree go to waste. That's the dreaded sunk cost fallacy in action. They're anchoring themselves to a past decision, ignoring the fact that the future version of them might be so much happier doing something else. This has huge implications for long-term financial planning. 1. Maybe you save up for a big house, only to discover you'd rather rent a small loft and travel. 2. Maybe you skip traveling in your 30s to invest everything for retirement, then your 50-year-old self regrets not having those experiences. Because our sense of self evolves, any rigid plan might crack under reality's pressure. Housel's point isn't don't plan, but rather plan on the fact that your plan will change. One of the best lines from this chapter is about avoiding extremes. If you plan on living extremely frugally forever or hustling forever, you might find your preferences shift, and then you're stuck. Instead, aim for moderate savings, moderate free time, and moderate risk-taking so you can pivot when your perspective changes. That's how you leave the door open to new possibilities rather than feeling locked into a single identity. How does compounding fit into all this, especially when life is so unpredictable? We'll see why successful investing always has a price, and it's not as simple as paying your brokerage commissions, but far beyond that. Chapter 15, Nothing's Free. Housel's big statement, everything has a price. If you want outsized returns in the market, you will pay for it in the form of risk, volatility, stress, and sleepless nights. It's not a punishment for doing something wrong, it's an admission fee to reap long-term benefits. We often treat market dips as if they're fines, that is, punishments for mistakes. But the reality is, you could do everything right and still face a 30% market crash, because that's normal from time to time. The crucial mental shift is to see volatility as the cost of admission, like a $100 ticket to Disneyland. It's part of the ride. You either pay it to get the excitement and the chance for big returns, or you stay home safe with a 0% growth bank account. He references how Netflix soared thousands of percentage points, yet was below its previous all-time high on the vast majority of days. That's a wild roller coaster. But the crazy dips were the price you paid for massive upside. People who see those dips and assume their fines might bail out at the worst moment. The ones who interpret them as normal fees are more likely to hold. Housel highlights big companies that tried to smooth out their earnings, like General Electric under Jack Welch or mortgage giants Fannie Mae/Freddie Mac, effectively hiding volatility so investors wouldn't panic. Eventually, the bill came due bigger and uglier. You can't cheat your way out of paying the price forever. Reality always has a way of showing up. The key lesson out of this chapter: 1. Accept the troughs. Realize that if you want big gains, you must accept big potential drawdowns. 2. Don't over-leverage. The surest way to fail is to attempt to dodge all volatility by timing the market or using fancy gimmicks that blow up in black swan events. 3. Think long-term. Embrace that these dips are normal, not a sign you messed up. In the next chapter, we'll examine why entire bubbles form, how they happen, who's at fault, and how the different games people are playing can lead to big mania. Stay tuned if you ever wondered why so many folks got sucked into the .com or housing bubble. Chapter 16, Different Games, Different Rules. This chapter addresses a key misunderstanding in finance: the notion that there's always one fair value for an asset. Actually, everyone might be playing completely different games with different timelines and objectives. That's why bubble logic can explode. If you're investing for 20 years, you care about a company's fundamental potential, growth, and stability. If you're investing for 3 months, you might be purely riding momentum or hype. If you're day trading, you might only care about tomorrow's price movement. So a ridiculously high stock price might be crazy to a long-term investor, but perfectly logical to someone day trading who sees short-term signals. When enough people jump in purely for short-term reasons, valuations can skyrocket to bizarre heights. Morgan Housel references how the late 90s saw unstoppable momentum in tech stocks. Annual turnover of mutual funds was through the roof, meaning people were effectively trading, not investing. It's no wonder valuations soared. Then came the crash because the long-term reality didn't match the short-term mania. The crucial lesson is to know what game you're playing and not to get lured by others who have different goals. If you're saving for retirement decades down the road, it might be a mistake to try day trading tips from a 20-year-old on TikTok. Conversely, if you're day trading for short-term excitement, you can't use the same metrics as a buy-and-hold investor. In the mania phases, everyone piles in because, for a short while, it seems like free money. This is how a bubble forms. Short-term participants become dominant, overshadowing any fundamental logic. The best defense is to keep your own strategy firmly in mind and remember that not all high prices are irrational. In the same way, though, they can become unsustainable if the majority is chasing quick gains. Next, we'll tap into why pessimism often feels more compelling than optimism, and how that shapes the stories we tell about money. Chapter 17: The Seduction of Pessimism. Pessimistic news grabs our attention more effectively than optimistic news. As Morgan Housel points out, saying, "The sky is falling" is often seen as wise or perceptive, while saying, "Things might be better than you think" can seem naive. From an evolutionary standpoint, it's safer to pay attention to threats. If your ancestors didn't worry about the saber-toothed tiger, they might not have lived to pass on their genes. In finance, we still carry that hyper-awareness of danger. Crash predictions, scandal revelations, and bubble warnings hook us like adrenaline-laden clickbait. The consequences: 1. Missed opportunities. If you're always anticipating the worst, you might stay out of the market or keep your money in a mattress. You avoid downturns but miss out on compounding. 2. Emotional weight. Constant negativity weighs on your psyche, potentially leading to erratic moves when the actual downturn happens. But are the pessimists ever right? Sometimes doomsdayers get validated, like in 2008's housing crash. The tricky part is they might have been predicting that same crash for 15 years before it finally happened, which means missing out on a lot of growth. The bigger takeaway is to maintain a balanced perspective. Yes, bad things happen, but overall, progress has marched forward over centuries. Optimism doesn't mean delusion. Housel isn't saying ignore risk. He's saying to be realistic. Historically, economies and markets tend to grow overall, even if they take big hits from time to time. If you're always on the lookout for an apocalypse, you could sabotage yourself. The challenge is finding that sweet spot, acknowledging risk, room for error, while not jumping at every shadow. Next, we dig deeper into how strong narratives can trick even the smartest of us, leading us to believe anything if it's a good enough story. Stay active for that crucial discussion about confirmation bias and the power of a good tale. Chapter 18: When You'll Believe Anything. Humans crave narratives. A good story can override numbers, logic, and critical thinking. This is especially true with money, where uncertain outcomes make us vulnerable to persuasive spins. One reason financial bubbles expand is that they come packaged with a hopeful or thrilling story. The internet is the future, or real estate never goes down. There might be a seed of truth, but it's blown up into mania by people who want to believe. When the music stops, we're left wondering how everyone got so carried away. We also cherry-pick data that supports our existing views. If you think the market is about to crash, you'll notice every article proclaiming doom. If you think it'll rally, you'll see only the bullish signals. The lesson: watch out for how you might be shaping the facts to fit your story, rather than letting the facts shape your view. Few modern examples are: 1. Crypto craze. People who believed in, say, Bitcoin's future success saw every small rally as inevitable proof that it was unstoppable. Detractors saw every drop as proof it was worthless. The real story was more nuanced. 2. Tech startups. We might believe the hype that a new app will revolutionize everything, ignoring the data that 90% of startups fail within a few years. We'll now gather all these insights into a cohesive approach, culminating in key strategies and practical wisdom. Stay tuned for the final chapters in which Morgan Housel ties everything together into a powerful, life-changing message about how to handle money psychologically. Chapter 19, All Together Now. In this penultimate section, for our chunk of the book, Housel weaves together the previous themes, balancing reason and rationality, preparing for the unexpected, embracing margin of safety, acknowledging that you'll change, and seeing market dips as a fee. He emphasizes once again that behavior often matters more than your raw IQ or your knowledge of complicated formulas. The key takeaways. 1. Simplicity over complexity. Don't be dazzled by complicated strategies if you can't stick with them. 2. Survival first, wins later. Focus on staying in the game long enough for compounding to do its magic. 3. Personal context. A strategy that works for me may not work for you because we have different emotional triggers, families, job situations, or risk tolerances. Think of an unassuming person like Ronald Reed. The Vermont janitor Housel mentions elsewhere in the book. Not a stock-picking genius, but patient, consistent, and never overspending. Over decades, that boring approach produced millions of dollars. Meanwhile, certain high-level executives or celebrities with huge incomes sometimes blow it all because they skip the fundamentals of living below their means and giving themselves that room for error. At this stage, Housel is driving home that 80% or more of personal finance success is about avoiding catastrophic mistakes and cultivating the right attitude. Like embracing fees, acknowledging surprise events, and not letting short-term mania lure you from your own long-term path. Morgan Housel wraps up by revealing how he manages money, an approach some might label suboptimal. He keeps more cash than experts say is rational, invests in simple index funds, and stays far away from trends he can't emotionally handle. He's not aiming to squeeze out every last bit of return. He's aiming to sleep well at night, be free of regrets, and ensure he never has to do something out of desperation. This self-awareness is key. You, too, need to ask what your own real goals are. Is it a 2% better return, or is it feeling good about your finances on a random Tuesday afternoon? Maybe you love analyzing individual companies. Maybe you don't. If you find stock research exhilarating, you might do well picking a handful of favorites for the long run. If you find it stressful, you might prefer the simplicity of index funds. The essential point is to be honest with yourself about your psychology. Teachings in everyday life. 1. Career choices. If you realize you're less risk-tolerant than your peers, don't shame yourself for not chasing a startup dream. Own who you are. 2. Family finances. Understand that your partner might have different thresholds for volatility. Collaborate on a strategy that honors both your emotional ranges. 3. Retirement plans. Build your plan in a flexible way so you aren't forced to retire on a specific date if the market dips at the wrong time. Housel repeatedly invites us to view money decisions not as purely numeric, but as a reflection of our values, preferences, and personal contexts. That's the real psychology of money. So there we have it. From fevers as cures to margin of safety, from the illusions of smooth earnings to the seduction of pessimism, from the day trader's mania to the decades-long wealth builder. Morgan Housel's The Psychology of Money shines a spotlight on our emotional relationship to finances. It's not about painting a bleak picture or offering a magic bullet. It's about acknowledging our very human quirks and channeling them productively. But guess what? Once you accept that there is no single best path and that everyone is playing a slightly different game, the pressure to follow the crowd often dissolves. You can chart a financial life that respects both your inner psychology and the unpredictable external world. Ironically, that acceptance can lead to more consistent results, because you're no longer at war with yourself or with cosmic forces you can't control. If today's discussion intrigued you, if you had those aha moments, or if you realized how often you fall prey to short-term mania or the fear of short-term pain, I highly recommend reading or rereading Morgan Housel's full book, The Psychology of Money. We've only scratched the surface of his brilliant book. Each chapter is laden with wisdom that can help you transform your relationship with money in ways that spreadsheets alone will never do. I challenge you, pick one concept from this deep dive. Maybe it's setting a margin of safety in your budget. Maybe it's rethinking volatility as a fee, not a fine. Maybe it's letting yourself pivot from an old career or major. One concept, test it in your life this week. Journal about it, share it with a friend. See what happens when you let this more flexible, psychologically aware perspective guide your decisions. And then, drop a comment below sharing your experience, because we learn even more by hearing each other's stories. Remember, money is never just about the money. It's about our hopes, fears, relationships, health, and identity. The more we honor that truth, the wiser and healthier our financial lives become. Thank you so much for joining me on this marathon exploration of Morgan Housel's extraordinary insights from the psychology of money. If you found value here, please consider hitting like, subscribing, or sharing with a friend who's on their own financial journey. Let's keep growing and learning together, one step at a time. Until next time, stay reasonable, stay curious, and as always, keep that margin of safety strong. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.